Hello, my name is Tucker Johnson, and I am your host today as we experience together Nimdzi Live, where we talk about the latest and greatest in translation, localization, internationalization, culturalization, and all that fun stuff global companies need to delight their international customers, or at least not to piss them off too much. On this program, we invite guests who like to have fun and have some value to add for our audience of globalization professionals. I'm always eager to provide a platform to those with a good story or a good data set. So let us know if there are any topics you'd like covered or guests we should reach out to for future episodes. If you haven't already done so, you're here on the Nimdzi event page. Make sure that you're following Nimdzi Insights on LinkedIn or following us on your social media platform of choice. If you do follow us, then you will be one of the first people to find out when we publish new research about the industry or when we schedule new live events. And we've got a whole bunch of live events coming up that some of them are already on the calendar. I'll plug those later. And some of them have yet to be scheduled. So stay tuned because we've got some good stuff coming in the next couple months from Nimdzi Insights. A quick introduction to the platform here. We are live on LinkedIn. And for all of you guys joining us today, make sure to take advantage of those comments. You can leave comments. We'll bring those up on screens if you have any questions or would like to add to the conversation. That's the best way to join in and have fun. Also, over on the networking tab on the LinkedIn events, say hi. Reach out and connect with some people. This is a social network, so make sure that you are being sociable on the social media platform. Before we get into it, I just wanted to plug a couple things. If you're not familiar with Nimdzi Insights, I would encourage you to go check out www.nimdzi.com. That's NIMDZI.com. We are constantly publishing research about localization, translation, globalization industry. Lots of good resources over there for you. We will be coming out with our annual report, which is the Nimdzi 100. Research for that is closing up this week. So if you are an LSP and you have not already submitted your information for that and you'd like to be included, make sure that you're doing that. If you'd just like to stay up to date on the latest industry research, you can go stay in the loop and subscribe to the newsletter or just follow Nimdzi Insights on social media, and we'll be bringing that up. We'll be publishing that within the next few weeks here. March is coming up. Likewise, I would encourage you to subscribe to Multilingual Magazine because we're going to be publishing the full market analysis and the industry ranking via Multilingual Magazine. So if you're a subscriber to Multilingual, you'll get that direct to your mailbox. Our two featured services that we'd like to highlight today are, first of all, because we're talking today about growth, LSP's growth, the state of the industry, taking a journey back for the last 30 years in the industry with our guest, who I'll introduce soon. If growth is something that you're interested in, either from the enterprise side or if you're an LSP, we have a lot of good information for you and a lot of good resources for you over on nimdzi.com. For our enterprise side customers, I'd encourage you to check out more about language technology consulting and audits. Here at Nimdzi, we do lots of audits and maturity assessments for our enterprise clients to help make sure, just to kind of verify their roadmap, make sure that they're all on track. For our LSP clients who are interested in growing, then we have a number of services available for you, from short-term consulting, sales consulting, and training to fully outsourced growth and sales management. So that's something that you can go check out on nimdzi.com or just reach out to us, and we're happy to talk to you directly about it. So getting into our subject for today, title of today's live stream is A Personal Journey Through 30 Years in Localization, featuring Matthias Caesar. And today we're going on a journey over the last 30 years in our industry. We're going to look at questions like, is there a perfect size for an LSP? How has technology changed what we do in this industry? How is it going to be changing how we're working in this industry? And lastly, most importantly, overall encompassing everything is what can we learn from the past to apply to our strategies today and in the future? And that's what we're going to be talking about today with our guest, Matthias Caesar, who I'll introduce here. Matthias, he started out in this industry almost 30 years ago with his first company. He learned a lot about how localization works by collaborating with clients like Microsoft and Amazon, the EEIG, which is the European Economic Interest Grouping. He founded, became one of only four premier localization vendors for Microsoft in the early 2000s. For the past 10 years, his focus has shifted from the world of Windows towards enterprise software and mainly SAP. And this entails a lot of process and technology consulting for increasingly agile processes and ever shifting processes. Matthias, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Did I get everything? Did I nail that? Is there anything that I'm leaving out here?
Absolutely spot on, Tucker. Thanks for inviting me and thanks for having me on the show tonight. I hope that we can bring some interesting insights into my personal view on my journey through this 3 decades in the industry. Um, yeah, I'm happy to be here and share my story.
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of people in chat too that have their own experiences, so make sure to be sharing those if you're joining us live today. Or even if you're not joining us live, if you're listening to the recording, you can leave those in the comments. So today we're looking at a travel through time, space, and size, and focusing a lot on size, I think. This is kind of a theme that we've been talking about here at Nimdzi with a lot of our clients, which is what is the right size for an LSP? How does that change as a language service provider grows and matures, and gets new clients in their book of business? And so I'd like to kind of start out just could you provide us a quick intro of a little bit about your background here? And I know I have some slides I'm going to try to bring up here to illustrate, but tell us about your journey through founding an LSP, working with different clients, and growing over the last 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's been a very exciting story, exciting travel and journey. It all started basically, I think, with my grandma, who gave me a Commodore 64 for my confirmation
Oh, wow.
when I was 14. So that's when I got into this whole computer stuff, which I think is a big part of what we're doing in our industry, at least if we talk localization rather than general translation, software localization. And that took me then to studies at our local university here in Dortmund, mathematics and computer science. So not really language related. And what brought me closer to this industry is really some great stuff that we have in Europe. It's called Erasmus, a Dutch guy from the 15th century. And we took that name in Europe and made a program out of it for exchange of students at school and universities. And I went to Dublin in early 90s in the early 90s. And that's where I actually found some love and passion for language, besides all that technical stuff and mathematics and numbers. And I was lucky enough to have a friend who just returned, a little older than myself, returned from an internship at Microsoft in the early 90s. And that's when in 93 we joined forces and started our first company.
So
We worked for,
you're
yeah.
uh you're not a language first guy in this industry. Well, like so many people are in this industry. They started off as linguists and they came to this industry because they love language and kind of begrudgingly learned the technology. You're more of a technology first guy, I would say.
Yeah. I liked computers and computer science and just found the passion to combine the two. And that was really an ideal career path for me, right? I didn't know about that. I didn't know about translation, localization for sure. I didn't know. So I was really happy when I found out that these things need to be done. That there are computer programs developed elsewhere, and German users would like to see everything in German, of course. And there's an industry doing it, just
Yeah.
that.
And Microsoft, you did a lot of work with Microsoft. They were really pushing a lot of innovation in this industry back in the day,
Yeah,
right? And still
yeah,
are. I mean, credit where credit's due. But they were one of the
absolutely.
first companies to really realize the need for mature localization practices. I would
Yeah.
say technology enabled. I should say too.
Absolutely. In that regard, we were really lucky that we had that customer, our only customer in the beginning, of course, and
I think
that they
Microsoft was a lot
really,
of people's only customer in the beginning. Yeah.
yeah, and they helped us a lot. I have to admit, really looking back, I mean, they helped us grow initially. They helped us with technology. They helped us with tools and everything. So without them, I think we wouldn't have gone that far, and I wouldn't be who I am now. It's really
Let's
amazing.
take a look at that growth, right? As
Hmm.
you've gone from 1993 to into the 2000s up until today, you've gone from startup to, growth-oriented company, mid-sized boutique. Talk to me about these terms. What's the difference between
Yeah.
operating a startup versus a mid-size versus a boutique company in language services?
Yeah, for me personally, the main differences were, for instance, at a startup, you would do everything from A to Z, like administering the company, but also doing stuff
Whatever
on the
needs done.
project.
Yeah, whatever
Exactly.
needs
Yeah.
done.
So it was really challenging. It was exciting. It was all new. And that's, I think, what makes out a lot of startups, that the founders and then the first that join the team, they're really so excited to start something great. And you have the future ahead of you. And sometimes you, of course, lose some of that drive along the way. For sure, if you don't grow, I think that's why we choose a path that led us to some growth. And
Well, and at
the
that
next,
beginning phase too, it's like if you're not growing, you're sinking, right? If you're not
yeah,
growing, then you're dying. You have to be growing. Otherwise, up until you get to a certain size, I would say.
right, yeah. And we were lucky, really, that we had like all the infrastructure that many people didn't have. I think in the beginning, working with Microsoft, we had this Windows for work groups and that little dial-up thing in one of the windows where you would connect with a modem through to their networks and download stuff that they wanted you to translate. There were still people out there translating paper or typewriters and fax machines.
Yeah, fax
So
fax was big
yeah,
back in the early days. Typewriters and fax machines.
absolutely. I mean, I remember that people that joined us, translators with really university background degrees, when they left university, people had still told them when you start a business in the industry, you need to have a fax machine. Without that, you won't get any orders. And when we look at that, yeah, we were a little more advanced, and I think that's also something that we can take away from this for our whole industry. I think we were always pretty much advanced. When you look at the COVID pandemic, for
Mm,
instance, everybody's shifting to remote work and now hybrid. We've been doing that from the beginning.
right.
Like the workforce, the translators, they've always been all places over the world, and you would connect with them remotely
And
through internet.
that was something I think I'm not the only person that was just kind of laughing, not laughing, but let's say chuckling at the
Yeah,
rest of the world because I mean I shouldn't make light of a global pandemic, right? So I'm not saying like I was super happy and laughing about it, but
yeah,
it was interesting to me to watch the rest of the world really scramble around how are we going we need to work remotely, how are we going to do this, we're not set up to do this, and everyone was freaking out about it, and us in our industry like it's business as usual pretty much. I mean,
exactly.
for some companies more than others, but like my company here at Nimdzi, like we've been remote since day one. We've only been around for 5 6 years now, and when we started out we had an office for a little while, but we were never dependent upon being together in an office. So, and I think that's just because that's how we do it here in the language services industry. So we had a lot, I think, we didn't have as big of a learning curve as the rest of the world when it came to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully subscribe to that, and that's something that we can also bring to others. I mean, we did help actually during the pandemic some of our customers with Teams, like Microsoft Teams, how you use that, how you implement it, and how do you put it to best use. So there's, I think, also value add from our experience of way of working in our industry that we can bring to others. They're not all Microsoft. There are a lot of smaller companies,
Right.
also startups, most of them technical, of course, since we're in the software localization business. Well, we can bring all these other things to the table and help them and share these stories.
Well, and we do. And I think, we call it language services providers, right? Language services industry. And ultimately, I mean, I think that's a very important distinction is that we provide services. We
Yeah,
don't just provide translation. We're not selling words, we're selling services around language. And I think that's something that when people first come into this industry, it takes them a little while to understand is the value that an LSP brings to the table isn't their ability to translate, it's their ability to manage the translation process. And as you were
yeah,
saying, like in a startup, like when you're young and hungry and working for your clients, you're doing everything. You're doing whatever you can, not just providing translations back and forth. You are scrambling to provide value to your clients, and
yeah.
that's the hunger of the startup. But then as you grow into a more mid-sized company, let's just to stay on this slide for a little bit.
Mhm.
What have you noticed is the difference between being a startup and being a mid-sized company, and the pros and cons, and the growing pains, and all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, the I thought the main difficulty really in terms of growing was not acquiring more business because that came kind of natural because of, I think, the good work we did.
Yeah.
It was really getting the people that would help us with all that.
Mm,
And back in the days, there was no, like nowadays, there are a couple of universities that where you can graduate, take a master class, and become a software localizer, for instance. All that didn't exist. And so we had to
right.
find people, interesting people, smart people from other industries or other education backgrounds that would join our team. And that's one thing that I really loved and still love about our industry, that there is so many great people with so different backgrounds, right? So that was the main challenge, to find these people, to convince them that it's interesting to work with us, and then get them familiar with what we're actually doing and with the tools and the processes. That was the most difficult thing. Besides, of course, also market changes that would
Sorry about that.
force us into changing things. And that's what we experienced during the growth period, when actually the market changed. At the beginning, we were like single client, single language, single site, small. And out of a sudden, there came along some other companies that call themselves MLDs.
Right.
And that told customers, oh, it's much more easy if you just source everything through one channel, have one point of contact. So that's a challenge that we were facing during that growth phase, and we had to find a solution. And since we were not really the financial guys that we could like go and do due diligence and acquire other businesses and integrate them, we weren't the greatest salespeople either. So what we focused inside and thought, okay, what can we do best? And we figured that we're good networkers.
Yep.
And we had an existing ecosystem that was provided initially by Microsoft, then Lisa, and localization world, and all these conferences that came about. So in our Microsoft ecosystem, we found a couple of partners, and we built a partner network. And you mentioned it in the
Yep.
intro. It's an EEIG that we founded there in the late 90s. A very specific type of company that confused especially the American customers because they had never heard of it.
I've never heard of it.
You know, it's basically the predecessor of an SE, and SE many people haven't heard of either. It's like a European corporation that is based on European laws rather than of any member states' local laws. And the EIG was something much smaller than an SE, and at the initial stage for that. SE, that's like Porsche, for instance, big insurance companies in Germany, others, they switched from AG, which was the corporation in Europe or Germany, to SE in the last 15 years.
Oh, okay.
And we started this little thing there, EEIG, European Economic Interest Grouping.
So that's, growing into mid-size. And we hear this term boutique all of the time here.
Right.
And the cynic in me, when I hear boutique, I think small, right? But I'm
Right.
joking. I'm being good natured because I've worked at boutique companies before, and I think they have a lot of value to add. And one thing, for especially any listeners out there who are just getting started in the industry, like one thing you're going to find out is this industry is incredibly fragmented. It is incredibly fragmented. There are not, and there will never be like one or two big players that are dominating everything. And you'll see this when the Nimdzi 100 report comes out next week. We'll have a market segmentation some data, some new data for 2022 around that. And what that means is there's a lot of room for smaller companies or boutique companies who are serving a specialized niche in the industry. And because we're not just providing translations, we're providing different types of services in there, I think these boutique companies can do very well for themselves. And I think kind of the question that we're going to be getting into here is is growth always the answer? If I have an LSP and I'm growing my LSP and I'm working hard trying to get new clients and all of that stuff, but I'm serving a very niche audience, does it make sense to keep growing or does it make sense to focus more on my specialization and my specialized client base? Right? What
Exactly. Yeah.
what and
I mean,
while I find the slide for that, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, like there's one slide that I built a while ago. It's like a quite difficult equation because I'm a mathematician, and it's a fake equation if you look at it more
Yeah.
closely. But
I,
what it basically says is the PCS, which I think is the abbreviation for perfect company size.
okay.
It depends on a couple of factors, of course, and I call them A, M, and T. And A could be the age of the company, of yourself, whatever. M is the maturity, and T is the technology. So you have to look at the maturity in terms of technology of the market you're in, like the verticals that you're selling to. Also, of course, the maturity of our services as an industry as a whole. Where do you stand there? And then make that somehow into something very personal that matches your desires, what you want to do, and whom you want to serve. So the real answer is not this equation. It's you need to find your niche. Like either you grow and be acquired and become a Linebridge and RWS through all these steps with Berlitz and Baum, DCAP, all those names from the decades ago, or you stay in the middle, which I think is the trickiest part. If you look at the market segmentation, it's either big and get bigger, or you stay kind of like small, whatever that means. How many how many people, I won't tell you. It's not like a strict guideline, but I think the small
Right.
ones, they have always a niche. They have an expertise that they bring to the market that nobody else can probably do the same way they do it. So for me, small and big, that's what is serving the market. And the middle is basically either dying or being acquired.
Yeah, they're
Putting
being
it simply.
acquired. Like we have a lot of healthy
Yeah,
mergers and acquisition activity
yeah,
in our industry, even through the pandemic.
yeah,
But we have here at Nimdzi, we have an M&A practice, so we help companies get bought and sold, essentially.
yeah.
So shameless plug if you're looking to get bought or looking to sell or whatever, reach out or looking to acquire, reach out to us. We can help you with that. But there's a big appetite for mid-sized companies on the M&A scene, I've
Yeah.
noticed, right? Because the amount of the amount of effort and investment to acquire a company is kind of flat depending, I mean, regardless of whether it's a mid-size or a small size. So if I'm going to invest a lot of money
Yes.
and pay Nimdzi a lot of money to help me acquire a company, I want to get something that's a good return on my investment. So that mid-size segment is rife with mergers and acquisitions. And that's about the
Yeah.
time when that starts to happen. Which then just opens up the niches that those companies used to serve or served. It opens up that opportunity for smaller companies to become the new mid-sized company. So there's a lot of fluctuation. You see the top five stay pretty static, right? They're not really going anywhere. But in the Nimdzi 100, that from 20 to 80, those companies are shifting all over the place a lot of the
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, there's always people dropping out after they've been acquired and they start something smaller again as a new startup. Uh, it's the nature not only in our industry, it's in many industries, and especially as you said, Tucker, in the beginning, in such a fragmented industry. It's really small ones going bigger or disappearing. So the constant flow, and then the big ones growing even further. And that's also because of the target customers. Like if you look at the big tech guys, they have such high demands. They have so much volume. I have to say that like 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would have said that I could, with my small team, I could even serve the big guys.
Hmm.
But that's changing now dramatically, because when you look at Microsoft and what they're doing, how customized their solutions are that they put out to their end users in terms of language and how that can be consumed, it's very, very different from what it was a couple of years ago. And it's so customized with AI. I think there's nothing that the smaller companies can do, really. It's just following the path. The big companies might have an edge there, but I think the innovation in some regard comes really again from Microsoft, Amazon, the likes, that bring something in terms of technology, paradigm shifts.
Well, there's a lot you just mentioned that I'd like to pick your brain on. And the first is with that innovation in technology. And this is something that I've said for a while. Not saying I'm right, I'm just saying I say it and it ruffles some feathers, is that in our industry, I'll say most, just so I'm not backing myself into a corner here. Most innovation around language services does not come, and I'm talking about like the real disruptive innovation, right? Things that change the way we do things. The disruptive innovation does not come from the vendor side. It does not come from the language services
Yeah,
providers. It comes from Google, from Microsoft, from
yeah,
Amazon, from
yeah,
Facebook, from the big five, from, or it doesn't even have to be big five, but the big companies. And sure, LSPs are doing interesting things around iterating technology and making the best mousetrap, but they're not inventing new traps, right? And I don't say that like maliciously saying, "Oh, LSPs are dropping the ball." I say that it just taking a realistic, pragmatic standpoint, because we localize, for example, as great as they are, they don't have the millions and millions of dollars to invest
yeah,
into research and development that Google
yeah,
does, right? So we've seen this innovation come kind of top down in our industry. And once again, I'm talking about like the real disruptive innovation, not developing
yeah.
a new TMS, right?
Yes.
The second thing that you mentioned was this people going out and starting their new companies. And I think that's something that's interesting and maybe not unique, but it's definitely a characteristic of our industry. And we actually have a term for it. Renato, my partner, has been calling it this for years. He calls it the Jello effect.
Mhm.
That our industry is like Jello, which is when you squeeze Jello, it doesn't break; it just gets everywhere, right? So when you
Yeah,
squeeze our industry, when there's layoffs in our industry, that's a pretty good indicator that in the next 6 to 12 months, you're going to see some startups enter the scene. You're going to see some new companies, because there's not, historically, I should say, there hasn't been a huge barrier to entry to getting into the language services industry. Do you think that's changing? Because, I mean, 10, 20 years ago, if you had a computer and you could project manage a couple freelancers, you could start an LSP. Um, but today, do you see the barriers to entry shifting in our industry?
I don't think so. I think it's even easier to, if you ask me. I mean, back then, one example is when we wanted to set up our first communication infrastructure and Microsoft Exchange server, right? We had worked on the localization of that thing, and we thought, okay, let's use it internally and in terms of communication with our teams. That was an adventure back then, right? We had to like start a whole project, sourcing the right parts for the computer that could actually run that, and then setting up the software, configuring it. That was, that took us 2, 3 months, honestly.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I mean, for the last decade, what do? You go to whatever website, in that case, Microsoft. We're not want to over advertise that, but you go there, put in your credit card credentials, and tell them 5, 10, 20, 30 licenses, and off you go. You're completely set with everything. So I think starting a business is much more easy today than it was back then.
Yeah. All it
But
takes is
then
your first client. You got one client
exactly,
and
exactly,
some free time to spend servicing them, then you
yeah,
got a company. And then
yeah,
it's just a matter of how do I find my second client, my third client out there.
yeah,
So going
yeah.
back to,
Everything became so much more easy with the cloud, right? You have like accounting software. You can connect it all with Zapier or whatever
oh
tools you
yeah,
want to use. They talk to each other. Just fantastic.
oh yeah,
You just have to have like some interest in technology. I mean, it's still not like plug and play in a visual kind of thing sense. You need to understand a bit the technology, but it's
oh
getting
sure.
easier and easier.
Yeah, I mean, when we started our company 5 years ago, and this is kind of a competitive advantage that younger companies have over the
Hmm.
old dinosaurs, is the old dinosaurs are running on these custom ERPs that were developed 20 years ago with a bajillion different things duct taped together. And nowadays, you can start a company. You're like, do I want to be on the Google ecosystem or the Microsoft ecosystem? And
Yeah,
then what accounting software do I need that's going to talk to my other ecosystems, right? So
yeah,
yeah, I see your point on that. So going back to the perfect this I love this equation. I kind of want to just have you walk me through the whole thing, but I don't want to bore everyone to death because you
uh,
have an answer slide here.
yeah.
So asking
I
what
mean,
the perfect company size is the wrong question. Why is that the wrong question?
because it's not really about the size in terms of revenues or people. I think it's really like if you're a business owner, for instance, I think you have to ask yourself, where do you excel, and what is your passion in that whole mix that you can do in our industry, in this fantastic industry with so many diverse applications and ways of working. So you really need to find out what you're good at, that puts you apart from the rest, and then you find that niche, and you can be really small and do that excellently, and you don't have to have a staff of 100 to solve the problem that you identified there. So what I'm trying to say here is the answer to the size question is really a very personal one, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Whether you want to grow and want to become big and sell your company, that's a very different strategy from being what I'm considering myself now, a boutique company that serves a small niche with special consulting and tools. So very, very personal.
And it goes back to this, and I forget who said this first, but revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just
Yeah.
chasing growing the top line, are you really looking at what's right? Or if you're, and this is something where me and Renato get into arguments about, it's like, oh, we want to have 500 people in 5 years. I'm like, why? That
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of work, right? We
Exactly.
don't need 500 people. That sounds like
I mean,
a
that
lot.
happened when we look at the growth that we went through, right? With this partnership that we had. Eventually, we thought, okay, this partnership is not stable enough and it's too difficult to sell it to our customers, especially in the United States. We have to do something about it. So we started the first and a second discussion round about merging either all of them or a subset of those partners into one entity. And that's what we eventually did. But with the problem and challenge, not so much about the market per se in the language industry. It was overall pretty difficult because of Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis, because we merged just the year before all that, excuse me, shit hit the fan.
Yeah.
So it became really challenging to manage the integration and get the funds and necessary money to continue the integration and continue growing. That was very, very, very difficult. And in that phase, really, I had to do things that I was never trained for and that I didn't like to do. It was really managing the crisis and managing the financial challenges, managing people fluctuation, all that stuff. So I went very, very far away from what initially drove me into this industry. What I liked about it, right? The language, the tools, and the people.
Yeah, I mean that's such a good point, right? So many of us get into this industry because we love language or we love the people, and this is very much a people-driven industry.
Yeah,
And as you grow, it's harder to focus on what brought you into this language or what brought you into this industry, right? If you get into this industry as a translator because you love language and you're quote unquote growing, which means eventually you're going to be managing other translators and then maybe
yeah,
be a project manager or a program manager or director or a VP. And VPs don't get to work with language, right?
yeah,
It's not something that's required of them, or at least they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be spending their time looking
yeah.
at TTX files, right? And it's kind of the tragedy of this industry is what brings us a lot of people into this industry. As we grow, we kind of shift away from that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I think this, your slide here on the success kind of sums it up here. Success
Yeah.
is not a
But
function. We had that big complicated slide or equation
right,
on another scene
yeah,
here, but here success is maturity and curiosity. I love this.
yeah. I think that's pretty simple, and I tend to believe that it's pretty much true. There's perhaps some other ingredient that I'm missing here, but to me, these two are the main ingredients. I mean, maturity, of course. I mean, you grow with the things that you're doing. I know more now than I knew 20 years ago. And that, of course, helps me to build new solutions, come up with new ideas. But I'm only doing that and I'm only coming up with new ideas and solutions because I'm staying curious. And I think that is really the key for everybody in whatever industry you are in, but for sure here in our industry, you have to stay curious and informed and try out new things, new technologies that come up. A good example, I don't know if you talk about it later, but like this chat GPT that
I was
everybody's
just
talking about in the
I
last
was
4 months, right?
Yeah, I was gonna
It,
say like that's a great example. There's always something. Talk about that.
it is. I mean, and when you look at it, um, like just last week, I think there was an even bigger bang when Microsoft announced the new Bing, which integrates the technology of ChatGPT, their friends at OpenAI, into Bing search. And I tried it just this morning again, comparing it to ChatGPT. What am I doing with this? I mean, you can play with it, of course, and use it for translations also, but the really the asset that this has and what it brings to the techie guys in this industry, I think, is it can help you a hell of a lot to speed up the creation of scripts for automation. It's really amazing. When you look at it, you need a Python script to glue something together or change a file or something like that. It's just it took you a day of thinking and a day of programming perhaps in the past, and now it's honestly, I mean, I created a script to solve a solution this morning. It was 15 minutes.
Yeah, and
Then you go through two, three iterations and then debugging it, making it better. You have a conversation with those with that agent basically to improve it and explain what you want to do. And it's a fun experience. It's an easy experience, and the results are remarkable.
yeah, and I think AI is not new, right? But what
Yeah,
ChatGPT is making it much more accessible to
yeah,
everybody, right? And one thing about our industry is we need to have awareness of all of the new stuff that's coming up.
yeah,
And if there's a new thing, then we need to have an answer because our clients are going to come to us and ask us about it. We don't necessarily need to have the most robust solution right away, but we need to have something about it, whether it's back when cloud was a big thing, right?
yeah,
That changed the way we did stuff. That,
yeah,
I mean, absolutely changed the way that we did stuff in our industry.
yeah.
What was your experience when cloud started becoming a big thing?
Well, when it started, I thought really that it could change the industry so much that we would be able to cut out the middlemen, that we wouldn't need these LSPs anymore, at least not the medium-sized ones, because
That
we could connect
there have
really
been
the
lots of
demand.
people throughout the decades that have
Yeah,
thought now now is the
yeah,
time to cut out the middleman.
yeah,
Lots of very smart, very capable people have tried to cut out the middleman, but the middleman,
absolutely.
and by middleman I mean LSP, is still
Yeah.
alive and well. Last time I checked. So,
I mean, it happens in some domains, in some use cases, really, yeah, where companies put out self-service portals for translation purposes, and
oh
they're
yeah,
being used,
yeah, it
and they grow,
happens. Yeah.
and they have a spot and a niche there too. Yeah, so it exists. Didn't exist 15 years ago, but now they are there. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So the cloud as such, I think. I mean, now we even see that Trados, now RWS, they have a cloud version. So everybody is trying to move the software into the cloud, just copying how they are doing it in client desktop application, server client applications. But there are a couple of new ones out there, and I'm actually, because we're small, I'm looking at the open source community, and I can just advise everybody to have an eye on those guys. They do tremendous work, and there's interesting developments in that area. Not that many because we're such a small industry, but we're using one solution that I think is very potent. Um, and because they're small too, and it's a diverse team, they react to your wishes and feedback, which
Yeah.
large corporations cannot do, of course, to individual
They just
feedback.
can't.
I mean,
Yeah.
no.
So where do you
So you're
see?
co-developing with them, basically.
Yeah, so and that's kind of the phase that we're in with GPT-3 or GPT
Mhm.
3.5, or I'm not the best guy at my company to talk to about that kind of stuff. But where do you see us with this? Because it's just everyone's talking about it right now.
Yeah.
And it will, like, I can sit here and say it will change the way that we do things in the industry, or at least create some new use cases. It might not put us all out of a job, but it's going to change the way some of us do our jobs. What are your, and in chat, if you guys have any opinions on this, let us know as well. But where do you see this taking over the next 6 months? Because I think it's going to happen fast. Like 6 months, I
Yeah.
think is a good time frame to talk about with
Okay.
this.
I mean, first of all, I think what's interesting about it is the perception of those things outside of our industry. When you look at the general public and the newspapers and they report about it. I read an article yesterday, I think, that ChatGPT can do so many things, translate for you, and can also program. And the journalist put it across as if that was so difficult. Whereas I think, okay, language is difficult because it
Mm,
has some rules, of course, grammatics. It's pretty flexible in terms of how you use it and how you put it. Programming language, on the contrary, they're pretty rigid. They're like structured, so it's much more easy to teach a system with artificial intelligence to spit out scripts, programs, and code for you. Uh, so that's what I think is one of the big application areas for our industry, but overall for other industries too. We use this artificial intelligence to boost automation, and not just at a
yep.
large scale for enterprises that have huge R&D departments putting that at this tackle the problem, but for, as I said, smaller ones too. So again, with cloud and other developments, there were always niches opening up for small companies. Same thing happening here. I think it's going to be a catalyst for smart small companies that can create solutions swiftly
Right.
that they couldn't do before. The other thing is also like, how can this change the whole process? And there, I mean, I'm just guessing really. One example that I thought of is like back in the days, there were companies out there translating by with the dictaphone. The translator would dictate the translated text into a microphone, it would record it, and a typist would type the translation. That was a thing that really happened. And when you take that and apply it to what's happening now, you could think of a new UI where like the text is translated by NMT and a reviewer actually talks with a chat GPT or with an AI to fine tune and improve and change the structure, the tone, the syntax, whatever in that language, in that text that they're translating. So, but that would require really like a complete different way of working and interacting with software, like when you compare it with CAT tools or something like that, or TMS systems. And that might happen. That might happen, but it won't happen in 6 months, I think.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I want to bring up on Adam in chat. Adam Asness mentions he has a good input here. He says, I use Chat GPT lots. Caveats are that it's often wrong and can make up stuff. As for programming, it can give you a head start, but can often be wrong. It reminds me of machine translation in the earlier days. Remember that right now there aren't private instances of ChatGPT, and there are limits to using a generally available resource, but it is super cool. And I kind of mirror that sentiment. I think we're at the super cool phase, right?
Mhm.
I think it's we have a new toy and we're not really sure what the final application's going to be,
Yeah,
and not even sure if chat gpt as a company or an open source, because it's open source,
absolutely.
right? I know Microsoft has a big stake in it, but it's still open and available,
Well,
correct?
the underlying technology,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
just the models and how they train it. Like that's their proprietary.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. It's just
But what
gonna.
I think really with this scripting, with programming, yeah, it does make mistakes. But what it teaches you to phrase your problem better, to be very precise
Hmm.
what you actually want to achieve and what you want to do, like with the file manipulation, for instance. And if you do that and go through iterations, They can be longer, like an hour or so, or even longer. But some cases they're really, as I said this morning, 15 minutes, and you do get a ready to use code snippet.
And I think taking back to like a language perspective,
Mhm.
from an LSP perspective, when new technology like this comes out, whether it's GPT-3, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's cloud, 5G, whatever, right? There's kind of two questions we need to ask ourselves. How can I use this from a language perspective to improve the work that I'm actually doing, right? So like
Mhm.
with AI, machine translation, right? It's like how can I make it machine translation or get better machine translation? Use this to get better automatically generated translation, increase efficiency and stuff like that, right? But the second question we need to ask ourselves, because we are a services driven industry, is how is this going to affect the inputs we're receiving from our customers? So, another way of saying that is how is it going to change the way my customers do business? So, if I'm doing a lot of marketing translations, well, are my customers going to start using automated marketing campaign creation with GPT-3, right?
Mhm.
Is that going to change the way that we approach transcreation, for example? See, I just thinking about it, I see a lot of good applications potentially for it with marketing and transcreation content, which transcreation has typically been, kind of a niche service, higher touch, more expensive than regular translation. But why, as a marketer, why would I create a US or domestic market focused marketing campaign and then translate it into a bunch of different languages word for word when I
Mhm.
can say, tell a machine to take the gist of this campaign and really localize it and create marketing campaigns from
Yeah.
scratch for all of these different
Yeah.
markets?
Yeah. That's a good point. And just thinking about it now, I think that's what's going to happen probably.
Yeah.
Because when you have people looking at these campaigns, they still think local. They are who they are. They live in the community they live in. Again, the same example that I made earlier with the new Bing. When you look at the CMO that did this presentation, what was the example that he was using? It was something around Super Bowl, because he's American.
Right.
And that happens so often. Like when we translated the first version of Visual C++ in the early days, the example was also a baseball game. I'll program that and then take it. So it's very US centric if things are developed in the US. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially in marketing, I think, to start thinking about creating something that is either US centric or squeezing it into something that might work globally and then translating the words. You should really go and create something locally or for the local target audience for sure. And that's where these AI things might help you to actually assume the role of a Chinese consumer or somebody in Mozambique or wherever. But for that, you need, of course, the data of those regions and languages, and that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I think the emerging markets that we're still talking about, some in Asia, for sure, Africa, uh, people that are in that domain, they have nothing to fear. It will be locally created or translated for a couple of years, if not indefinite.
Well, I mean, we could talk on this. That's a subject of a whole different podcast. If
Yeah.
we kind of went down the Chat GPT rabbit hole, because that's what's top of mind for everybody right now. But
Mm.
bringing it back to your journey and your experience, like we've got you here, and you've built your companies, plural, from scratch. You've seen a lot of changes come to our industry, and you mentioned that you believe it's easier now than ever. Maybe not easy, but it's as possible now as ever to be starting new companies, trying out new ideas, serving new niches that are popping up in our industry. What advice, to close us out today, would you have for the next generation of service providers out there in our industry?
Yeah, I think the main advice is really stay focused. That you shouldn't lose sight of what you did initially and what you're good at, and stick to it. Of course, you have to make corrections if you see that things are not working as you expected, if the market is not responding to them as you had hoped. But it's I think very difficult to develop a company that has three, four, five different areas of expertise. It's better, I think, to partner in that case, and that happens at any scale. I think where companies partner up, Microsoft and OpenAI is another example again. So at the core, you have to understand what you're doing really, really well, and keep that at the corner of what you're doing, regardless of where you are in the stage of development and growth.
Regardless of size.
Regardless
Right.
of size, yeah, very
Exactly.
good.
Well, I think that's as good of a note as any to take us out on. Matthias, thank you so much for making this happen today and coming on and sharing your experience with us. I'll take us out here, but anybody who wants to get in touch with Matthias afterwards, make sure to add him on LinkedIn, reach out directly. I'll put his contact information up here on screen really quickly. Matthias Caesar, Matthias C at ilocit.de is where you can find him. So, with that, ladies, gentlemen, chat, we are out of time for today. And if you enjoyed this episode of Nimdzi Live, then make sure to join us next time. We don't have any Nimdzi Live episodes on the calendar, but we got a bunch of events coming up. Our next one will be on Tuesday, February 21st, where we're talking about the latest research that we've done on the business confidence study for 2023. Where are people's heads at going into 2023? We've been coming out of a few years, and so what's the outlook for the industry? That's going to be hosted by my colleague Sarah Hickey. On February 28th, I and my colleague Laszlo will be talking to Julia Tarditi from Qualtrics about measuring and improving localization maturity. She has done amazing things at Qualtrics, leveling up the localization program that is there. Absolutely amazing things. So if that's something that you're interested in, then come check us out. You can go sign up for it right now on LinkedIn if you haven't already done so. So once again, finally, my name is Tucker Johnson, host of Nimdzi Live, and it has been my pleasure to join you all today. I appreciate our guest, Matthias Caesar. I appreciate my colleagues here at Nimdzi Insights doing all of the hard work so I can have these fun conversations. I appreciate everybody in our industry who's filling out Nimdzi surveys, especially those of you that are responding to the Nimdzi 100 survey, which is closing tomorrow. Hint, hint, make sure to get that in. And I appreciate you, the audience, who are joining us live today. All of the dialogue, questions, and comments in chat. And I look forward to next time. Cheers.